You and everybody else. But, it. Do ETs have the technology? Do we have the technology? How do we know what's ours? How do we know it's not? What?
The technology. One thing almost everybody agree, even the believers say haven't been able to crack it in reality. And my example is if an F-35 crashed in the Amazon and the Carina Quarry picked it up, you'd probably have better spears, but you wouldn't understand flying and stealth and all of that. And that seems to be, almost in the rumors that come back and just say, don't understand. Now, there are those who say, no, we've been flying it for a long time. And I think that's bullshit. And the reason is if you had the technology and could fly it, the issue is not little widgets flying. It's about understanding technology that's fundamentally different. You can make the Middle East irrelevant. And in fact, in one of my books I wrote to that, because I write little vignettes of what would happen, and it was that zero-point energy source is discovered, and it changes the geopolitics of the world, which it would. And so that you would take this and go make a little widget to fly, inconsequential compared to understanding. Now, we also looked at what would it take if you did understand such an energy? And our best guess is, at least 2, probably 3 decades before you could inculcate that. And you can see examples of that right now with electric cars, because you're talking about, the big question of, okay, where are recharging mechanisms and all that? To put in that infrastructure takes decades. So you would get started well ahead of time. So I think the idea that we've had it and sequestered, and that the other flip side is usually, the oil barons and all that would just bury it because they want to keep theirs going. I say, no, they would own it. They would just go out and buy it. We have the concentration of wealth as we do in the U.S. Right now. Now, the people with money would just, invest in that and buy it. There's no need to be afraid.
Yeah, that is a good point. Let's talk about some of these abductions. I'm sure you've looked into some of the abductions.
Okay.
What are some of the abductions that really stand out to you that you find to be credible?
Well, again, I had mentioned before John Mack, and he was the premier guy in abduction phenomena. And John was much more circumspect than most people realize. Again, little gray eyes from Zeta Reticuli, picking people up and that. The converse is the one that I mentioned before. Here's the guy who, it's interesting. He becomes the executive officer of the CIA. He's literally in charge of counterterrorism for the U.S. for a while, who has to sleep with the light on. And like I say, I put Jim down, and I know his wife too, highly, highly credible people. And, of course, they can't answer what happened other than they're sleeping in the room and they end up outside and there's no doors to get there and things of that nature. Again, I think we're back to complexity and, Whitley Strieber is a good friend. We've talked about, Whitley his cases, stuff that happened in New York. He's the one who had come up with a whole anal probe kinds of things. I don't think that the issue is in hybrid children and fighting is, well, if you're fighting ET, that's total bullshit. Because if ET understands physics and can get across the universe and get here, they also understand biology. And I don't need humans to make new humans, and I don't even need life humans. If I can collect, though we've seen this now with the DNA, alive, and what I've said is ET says no to free-range humans. What they would do is, if it were adversarial, is just wipe out the people and create their own. It'd be a biological attack. I forgot to mention to you that you don't realize, and I just learned this morning on the internet, that you're talking to a zombie who is controlled by evil ETs. That's literally on the internet today. I'm a zombie, and so this stuff gets pretty wild. And again, the damn issues of complexity. Do these events happen? Oh, absolutely, happen. But having said that, again, you get back to the interactions of humans and sentient non-humans. We've been having abductions. Remember Rip Van Winkle? And there's one that's in the Quran, and this notion of going to sleep or bilocation, and that has been around forever, and not necessarily that some ET snatched them up and moved them there. Why does it come? Are there, they call it cloaked memories, and changing it to make people think that it's something else. See, one of the things I mentioned earlier on the Cash Landrum case, helicopters flying around, absolutely weren't there, and have looked at that and said, but can I make you think they're there? Can we do thought projection so that, that these things are being projected so the recipients they're reporting what they actually see, but that's because something that's being implanted directly into the brain. Scary thing, if you watched in the news in the last couple of weeks, them talking about Chinese working on thought control.
I have.
Yep,
I actually.
where you can.
I've read about that. What do you think about that? Do you think that's a possibility?
You have to describe it.
Thought projection.
Oh, parts of it are absolutely real. No, we can. This is an area that I don't know if it's still classified or not, but there are ways to project certain that are very prosaic, complex but prosaic. How much you can do, I don't know, but we're talking. If Cash Landrum is the UFO is there, that physical, and we know from a physical fact something was physically there, but can implant thoughts that are terribly complex, i.e. it's not just, but it's, certain types of helicopters are flying around this thing. We know for sure they were not. That talks to a degree of technology that's well beyond certainly anything I've ever heard of or even been sort of being close to. By the way, related, I was giving a briefing on non-lethal weapons to the director of science or director of research at CIA headquarters. And never met the whole thing of thought control has been, in the CT arena. And, he went off into that. And it was, I don't know if people know what happened on the church committee but that's the whole LSD thing and that, and said, no way in hell are we touching something like that. And people would look, I think you play You Bet Your Agency, and when you do that, if you get caught playing with those kinds of technologies. Now, having said that, of course, this recent stuff has been associated with China and certainly don't have the same moral limitations that we might on that. But the implications of where that goes is just really, really horrendous.
I mean, obviously they would have to tap into some type of a consciousness. Obviously they would have to tap into some type of consciousness. I mean, we're talking about
well, depending on how
plants.
you're defining consciousness now. See, you're back to, I think there's a significant difference between the brain and the mind.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're really talking about here is being able to manipulate the mind. And what we know from like fMRI, for instance, yeah, you can do that. That works both ways. You can also read the mind based on certain physical responses. I've argued in some.
I guess what I'm saying is if you're able to, how do I explain this? If you're able to, let's talk about the cell sample. Your cells were hooked up to the polygraph machine, and they were able to pick up on your emotional algorithm.
Right.
Would there be a way to reverse that to where the cells can manipulate the mind?
Yeah, you're very close to something that Bert and I were discussing. If you remember when Reagan was shot,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that came up, everybody attributed to ghouls, but trying to collect bandages and all of that. And we're in a highly speculative area here now, but it was, can I take this sample and revert it back to where you can influence the actual organism? I mean, you're talking the Manchurian Candidate at a whole different degree here, but the concern, we literally had discussions about, who's controlling all of these physical samples that are coming from the president. And could you do this? Again, emphasize that this gets used, highly speculative, but thought about, certainly.
Last thing, interspecies communications.
Yeah?
Let's talk about it.
Okay. Which species?
The dolphins.
Oh, the dolphin research. Yeah. Well, we did that. The dolphin research was actually doing interaction stuff with the whales. Again, we're interacting a lot closer than we are with humpback whales and whatnot. And so they knew exactly where we were.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and the ability to do that. It wasn't exactly communication, but we were in a rigid rubber 10-meter boat. I mean, could have flipped that in a heartbeat, and yet we're having interactions at inches from that. But no, there's several applications there, and this is going to go off into the Bledsoe story as well. We had done, a guy I had mentioned was Ted Rockwell. He's the one who had been with Rick over as technical director, very interested in these areas, and he had funded this. And what we did was we were dealing with two aspects. One was dolphins in the open ocean. We did a week. This was off of the Bahamas. Went in the north end, signed in, and up in north of there. And spent a week out there. And we had the protocols that we set up was for very practical reasons. There would be no physical contact unless they initiated it. And the app is they're suspect to human infections and things of that nature. But again, these are pods in the open ocean, and they vary in size. And what happens normally is in the morning they will break up and go hunting and come back together late in the day, and they can run from twos and that to hundreds. We've seen some of that. So we were working. Actually, an ex-wife was the one who was psychic on this and would have interaction. If they came, we would get in the water. By the way, being if you've dived with them, but it's just amazing. I mean, you've got these things, hundreds of pounds, and they're inches away from you because they would come to us while you're in the water.
Are these wild?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We're talking open ocean, anyway, so we started into some of the psychic things, and would say, I think they're coming, they're a long ways off. And there's one in particular where we were trying to communicate and have them do certain things. And you'd see them come rolling in, and then we were on the boat. Anyway, we're Dream 2, and had a small raft that were towing behind it, and to bring them in, and you'd see them, we saw them coming across, and had them, again, the telepathic instruction was to make a major shift and to go back out and circle around and come back in, and had them respond to it. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of the time we would get in the water, we'd keep the fins and goggles there, so you had to get in the water fast to get their attention and they would say and play with you when we did that. But this is one trying to give telepathic communications and have them do it. Now, there's another set of experiments, but these were in captivity. And they did this, I forget where they were, but they were in tanks, and they put up signs roughly north, south, east, and west. And there's another guy who deserves credit here, was Scott Jones. Has that name popped up at all?
No, it has
Antiquity, one who's key in many of these areas, and then had become he's an ex-Navy pilot, a lot of strange stuff from Korea, had experiences, and then got involved in these areas and became assistant. Claiborne Pell was the senator who became quite interested. Anyway, Scott set this up, and so what they did is he made a number of cards with sets of instructions. And then they put them in the envelope and numbered the envelopes, but did not know what instruction is in what envelope. And so there would be things like go to north, circle counterclockwise twice, go to east, etc. And they did that and had 5 out of 5. They had 6 envelopes. 5 out of 5 does that, and then they would read the instruction and send the message. They would do it. 6th one picks up, no, she does not know what's in the envelope, right? Dolphin starts a routine and opens it up. And they had done the routine before they'd even, seen it.
Wow.
Yeah. I knew John Lilly, and you may know Lilly on dolphins because he had done a lot of the basic research on that. He also warns you that you got to be careful a bit because they can get aggressive, particularly with women. Yeah, there's a sexual component to it. But yeah, where I mentioned earlier, this is Chris Bledsoe's case, and we can talk about the whole thing, but he's one who's having interactions with orbs on a continuous basis. Starts with an amazing case. But I wrote the foreword to his book, UFO God. It appears as if this is some form of communication that we don't understand, but he has a telepathic communication with him. Now, one of the things that they did, and I understand they've now just recently replicated, but hasn't aired, there was the program called Beyond Skinwalker Ranch has a set on Chris, and I'm in that. But near the end, what they do, I mean, this really blew them away. David Broadwell, who was orchestrating this, got a hold of a guy, and they have a EEG helmet. And so they've got Chris outside, and when they show it in the film, what's really effective is Chris is there, he's pointing to orbs that are moving around. They're photographing the orbs so that they see that. So you got him in the poem. And the third one is actually the reading from his EEG. And what you see is a profound shift to something that looks like a Zen meditator with 30 years experience with them and that. But the brain waves just shift tremendously when he's, again, doing this communication with the orbs. I said the problem at the moment is we have yet to figure out the Rosetta Stone where we can understand what this means. And getting back to Brandon, he also says that in Skinwalker Ranch, he thinks that the issue is attempted communication. We just don't understand it.
What kind of communication is Bledsoe having with these orbs?
Oh, he calls them and sees them almost daily.
He calls them and they come in.
Yeah. I get emails. I haven't had an email for a week or two, but almost every week, if the weather's good, he goes out and, they respond. And
do you think he would be interested in an interview?
Yeah, he would. No problem with that one.
Chris Bledsoe.
Yeah.
Roger that.
We'll talk about that, but the case it's another one. The complexity of that case is absolutely amazing, and that it's turned into a positive thing. In fact, I just sent him on, I think it was Tuesday, was the 16th or 17th year since his first major event happened. And I sent him a note that said, happy anniversary. Because it was, he has a fabulous family and all been involved, but they took a lot of heat.
Yeah.
MUFON, why they existed. They got a video up on it. It's just terrible what they did with him on the initial reporting. And, of course, the local community. And to make it matters worse, his family comes very fundamentalist Christian and does not want to hear that. And but we can talk about the case itself is interesting because it's one where I had a personal experience with it. But I'm absolutely convinced of the reality, mostly because of what happened to me. I mean, most of these things I've talked about are things I've observed or been around, but this was one that gets me. Yeah.
Man, this is a lot to think about. I do. One other thing came to mind that I would like to ask you about, and that is the underground ET bases. Lots of people talk about it. I don't know what to believe.
Well, tell me more about what the question is.
Well, what really popped on my radar is, I've always heard about them. That these Tic Tacs, UFOs come out of the ocean, they come out of the ground, and some people think that they've been here all along. Then when I was researching Joe McMoneagle, I found kind of a mini documentary that talks about these remote viewers that remote viewed underground bases, one being in Mount Hayes, Alaska.
Yeah, that's Ingo.
What do you know about this stuff?
Mostly what you do, and the probability of it being significant and the physical reality, I think, is pretty slim. But you're back to what do you mean by UFO, and you say, where do they come from? If it's an interdimensional thing, then you don't have a problem of that. And you also don't have a problem of physical space, of where are they? Now, having said that, as if it sounds highly negative, conversely, again, if you're talking, just finish over to the near-death arena and the mediums, and they talk about the spirit world that's very, very close to us and aware of what we're doing and interacting, and it's, physically right here, immediately adjacent. It gets you away from a lot of the problems of, like I say, time and distance and things of that nature. But it's, worth considering, certainly. But that gets you away from necessarily that there's a fixed base that's there, that's in three-dimensional reality as we know it. Is this in something that has other dimensions? And so it's not physically taking up space, and you've got to get there. Because we know where Mount Hayes is, and, having said that, have heard for a long time, about UFOs flying into and out of mountains and mesas. It's much rarer than the typical UFO story, but certainly there. You must remember something I haven't hit. One of my first questions always is, what do you mean by a UFO? And the problem is they got little balls of light, got hard craft miles across, literally, and thousands of variations in between, which in my view argues strongly against, by the way, the ET hypothesis, putting together. If, on the other hand, you say this is a mental construct and you're seeing different things, again, you're back to consciousness, that certainly makes more sense. I also, second slide, or I think usually a second slide that I always use is when I talk on any of these topics, and it's got, I know all of them, but it's got near-death experience, after death, psychokinesis, interspecies communication, UFOs, and this and all that. I said even cryptozoology, and say, yeah, these are all related, and consciousness is the key component. The problem is we tend to isolate and study in little stovepipes. And I have a thing that says, look, I give lectures to the UFO community and near-death experiences, shamans around the world, and remote viewers. And it is changing, but for the most part, those are as if isolated. And one of the first things you run into is, what are your parameters? In near-death, what do you mean by being close to death? Because most of the cases where you have no idea. And one of the things we ought to talk about separately are the few cases where the individual is entirely instrumented. So you know that they're, but even the case that I mentioned, Mary, I mean, all we have are the stories after the facts, and you have to infer that death had occurred. You have to infer that she had some ways of getting communication and information about what would happen years later. We do know that piece of it happened, but a lot of inference as to how all of that occurred.